Usually you come to a Kunstverein, you come from a smaller Kunstverein or other places. I came from a museum. So I brought a completely different structure to the Kunstverein as well. It's like, I have certain projects I want to do in my life, and these projects I can't do in Vienna. And that was very interesting for me. It's a different atmosphere than in Germany, for example. High culture really means something there.
All right, welcome to the first conversation as part of the community on arts and culture, which investigates, deals with, seeks to look into innovating practices of local art spaces and international art museums. And it's fantastic to have Bettina Steinbrügge here. Bettina Steinbrügge is currently director at the MUDAM, the Museum of Modern Art in Luxembourg. But you actually have some ties here to the Leuphana University and to Lüneburg in particular. And so first and foremost, it's so great having you. Maybe you can speak a little bit to these ties and your past, which links you to this wonderful place.
Thank you so much for the invitation. And yes, it's really quite weird being here. I mean, I have a long history. I don't remember when I moved to Lüneburg. It was my first job after university, because actually I wanted to stay in Düsseldorf at that time. And then Heike Munder called me because she heard of me from friends and asked me, don't you please come to Lüneburg and work with me in Halle für Kunst, a young, very small art association, Kunstverein, as we call it. And then that's how I arrived in Lüneburg. And then I started working as her assistant. But in the first 6 months, she got appointed the new director of the Migros Museum in Zurich. And then suddenly I was the director of Halle für Kunst. And I think a couple of months later, I started working for the university here. I started working with the Kunstraum, then I started teaching. I taught art history of the 20th century. We did a lot of team teaching at that time. So I was working with Ulf Fugenig, with Christoph Behnke, Volker Kirchberg, Sascha Cagon. And we did quite some seminars together. And so we worked on European projects for the Kunstraum. And I've done that for 7 years.
Yeah. How was the time in retrospect? I mean, what were the main challenges? I mean, now it sounds like, it's kind of a wonderful work and starting to work more collaboratively with other local art spaces, such as the Kunstraum, which is located here at the campus of the Leuphana University, and with academic stuff from the university. But how was that for you in your own professional biography?
I mean, I have to say the time in Lüneburg is still, it formed me in a certain way. And it's still, until today, very important. Because I started working here between academia and art exhibitions, exhibition making. I do this until today, in a way. And I added sociology, arts and sociology, to my portfolio. I often call it my second paid study, actually, because I learned a lot while looking at my colleagues, while teaching, I mean, at that time, the Kunstraum was really strong. And so we had so many people here. It's like, here I met for the first time Hito Steyerl, Chantal Mouffe, and all of the other, Hans-Ulrich Obrist. I edited texts of Hans-Ulrich Obrist while being in Lüneburg. And it was like, it was this very small town. I mean, for parties, we did go to Hamburg. And, but it became the world in a way. It was really interesting. I never had the feeling that I'm missing something. I lived here. I didn't live in Hamburg. And there were so many professional ties I got through Lüneburg, and it's really interesting because all of these ties are still existing. And with the Halle für Kunst, for example, I did a European project. That's why I'm today in Luxembourg, because I worked with the Luxembourgish institution at that time. And we worked, it was before all of the Eastern European countries became part of the European Union. And over 3 years, we built up ties. We did many exhibitions. We did studio visits in Eastern Europe. We met tons of curators and artists. They're still around. And the Halle für Kunst Lüneburg, I mean, we had like, I don't know, 80 square meters. You know, we worked together with museums. We worked together also with Villa Azan, with the Micro Museum in Zurich, with the museums in Cluj, with the casino in Luxembourg. And it's interesting how this became quite international. And, you know, I had a lot of discussions at that time, because if you do a small space like Halle für Kunst in Lüneburg, not a lot of people see you programming. But at that time, we always said, you know, it's big. We made it much bigger as it was, and we had a very good communication. So a lot of people, whenever I traveled, and I traveled a lot, and I got invited to foreign countries, people knew what we were doing. And they didn't know that there's only 60 or 80 square meters. You know, it was just like building up a whole universe.
Is this, I mean, maybe coming back to two of the points you just raised, you said the Kunstraum was particularly strong at that time. Yes. So you talked about the people you met, Hito Steyl, Hans-Ulrich Obrist. And then you said the Halle für Kunst became the world. How do you make that? How do you do that? How do you turn 80 square meters into something which becomes a world?
That's a very good question. I mean, it's pretentiousness, I guess. Yeah. It's just like, it's just saying it. Yeah. And be interested, be curious. I think it's a big question is curiosity, because I was always curious until today. Yeah. It's just like, really, I wanted to meet all these people. Yeah. I wanted to do these projects. I did big projects in Lüneburg as well. I wanted to do this. I wanted to work with institutions in different countries. I wanted to learn to know all these curators. And if you go out there, and if you travel, and if you ask people, then it comes back. Yeah. You know, you go into the world, and the world comes back. Yeah. And the world knows you. Yeah. And suddenly, and then you can turn, and then you realize it's not about square meters. It's not about big cities. It's really about being curious, meeting human beings, doing projects, and also thinking about what is actually contemporary. Yeah. So what kind of topics are contemporary? And it's really interesting. I mean, look at Germany today. Or Paris. Paris, you know, France is centralized. You have a very different art scene. And in Germany, Berlin doesn't have the main institutions. You know, they're all over. They're spread out in Hamburg, in Cologne, in Munich. It's a very different world, and you can be in a very small space, and you can communicate with the world today even more than 20 years ago.
Would you then still say that this is a kind of, because there seems to be almost a transition of this kind of thinking, maybe this sort of being ambitious as with regard to what a programming of an art institution ought to be, which may also translate into your current work, and we can talk about this in a second. But would you say that this is a particular challenge for rather small art spaces? That you then have to go out, that you have to pretend a bit more, that you don't talk about the 80 square meters? It
depends on what you want. Yeah. I mean, it's, you know, we didn't even talk about square meters because we talked about topics. Yeah. Yeah. And that was the interesting part. And be taken seriously is dealing with topics in a very serious way and in an open way. That is also very important. I mean, sure, you have to make more noise in a small space. Yeah. That's for sure. Yeah. In Berlin, for example, or if you're in New York, people come. You know, there's a new space, they come, maybe they get a good bottle of beer. Yeah. To Lüneburg or other smaller spaces, they don't. Yeah. So how do you make it interesting? And yes, it is ambition. I was always ambitious my whole life. Without ambition, you can't do it, because without ambition, you rather do a local program. Because it also, I mean, it's also precare. One doesn't earn a lot of money. One works 7 days a week, like 10 to 12 hours a day. One needs a lot of energy to do that. And one needs to organize travels because it was also difficult. I didn't make a lot of money. So, yeah, it is ambition and curiosity, I guess.
We'll be talking later today. We will also be talking to students, so I think that's actually something quite interesting. Yeah. And so, if I understand you correctly, precisely, I mean, what you call these, at least partly your as you called your second paid education these years.
It's my second paid education.
Quite transformative years. Yet you moved on in a way after a while. Why was that? Was there because there was opportunity coming? Was there because...
No, actually, this was the only time when I took the decision, because I was sitting on January 3rd in the office at Halle für Kunst, and I asked myself if I really want to do this for another year, because I did it for 7 years. And in such a small entity without lots of money, it costs so much energy. And at a certain point, the format is done. I did everything I was able to do here. And so I was sitting in my office, and that very minute I decided to leave. And then at that time I was working for the residencies in Hanover as a spokesperson for the Kunstraum and for Halle für Kunst. And I think I stepped back the same day. Or the day after, I don't remember. And I didn't know what to do, but sometimes you have to close the door before you can open a new one. And this one was definitely done. It's actually Beatrice von Bismarck who told me this thing about the format. Yeah. You have to decide what you still can do with the format, and I knew I can't do anything anymore. And then I first moved to Berlin, and then I had I needed money, and then I worked as a translator. I worked in a commercial Danish gallery actually for 6 months. That I realized gallery is really not my work. And then while working for Lüneburg, I also had ties to Geneva. And then they asked me to work for the postgraduate program. So I did that from Berlin, and I also did that for 6 or 7 years. It was really interesting because at that time, mainly students from Latin America were working in Geneva. And so I also really learned a lot, and it was also between practical work and theory. It was a bit like Lüneburg, but more artist-based. Yeah. And it was a CCC program that was run by Lilian Snyder and Catherine Kilo at that time. And then I did Geneva, and then I started working for the Berlin Film Festival. I became part of the curatorial group for Forum Expanded, and I did that for 8 or 10 years. Yeah. And then I also started working. I had like 2 years at the Kunsthalle Mulhouse in France. And I worked as an associate curator and did, 3 bigger shows there. It was, so I worked between 3 places. And after 3 years, this time I applied for a post in Vienna. I became the head of the contemporary art collection of the Belvedere in Vienna, so a very traditional museum with over 200 employees. And I was employed together with a colleague, Cosima Reiner, to open the new, we called it 21er Haus. It was the old 20er Haus, a building from Karl Schwanzer from the 50s. It used to be the pavilion for the Brussels Expo, and then they moved it to the Arsenal Garden, and it became the MUMOC. And then MUMOC moved out and became this new building at Museumsquartier. And then it was empty for quite some time, and then the Belvedere bought it. And the Belvedere never had exhibition spaces for contemporary art. And they're collecting, they have a huge contemporary art collection. And so Cosima and me, we were there to open this building to help starting the whole project. Like we started with the name, now they renamed it to Belvedere 21. I think on an international level it is better. Started with a concept for the bookstore, a concept for the restaurant, a concept for for the collection, and so on. And it was extremely interesting that time.
I mean, it sounds fantastic. Also, this journey from then, I mean, not just from Lüneburg via Berlin, via France, via Switzerland, to then Vienna. Now, Vienna is a quite particular city for many reasons, but one of them, as with regard to cultural or art spaces, Vienna is full of museums in a way. Huh? I mean, there's a lot of both, I guess, competition, but also places to learn from or get inspired from. And I guess that would be one of the many, fundamental differences as with regard to, for example, then Lüneburg. How did you deal with that? How did you work in an environment which is so rich of artistic exhibitions, practices, and interested publics?
I mean, it's Vienna is fascinating because there are so many people. You know, all the people on the streets know what's going on in Salzburg during the Festspiele. They know the museum program, cinema, film festival, and so on. So it's high culture really means something there, and that was very interesting for me. It's a different atmosphere than in Germany, for example, or in France. And I moved a lot between the cultures. And before studying, I lived in Chicago and studied for the Art Institute of Chicago, at the Art Institute of Chicago. And I spent a year in Paris, learning the language and moving between the cultures. And then I thought, I go to Vienna and it's easy. We speak the same language. It's not true. It's unfortunately not true. It's a very different language, and it was kind of a culture shock. It was in the beginning, I had this feeling, why am I constantly running against a wall? And then I did coaching for Germans in Austria, and they explained it to me, and it helped. Because I really changed my habits. I also changed the melody, you know, because the German is really too harsh for Austrians. I'm still doing it. I land in Schwechat and I start speaking differently. And it was like, for me, it was very important. And also especially the Belvedere. The Belvedere is a particular museum because it's a big national museum. It's mainly Austrian art. The bourgeoisie and also the royal families from Austria, they are all connected with the Belvedere. It has something, it has a grandesse. In this, and so, and it's also, Belvedere is making its money with a kiss. You know, people come with buses from 9 in the morning, they go and see the kiss, then they go out or they go to the souvenir shop. So I also learned the marketing side. And also decision-taking for exhibitions was quite different. Not in the contemporary part, but in the other parts. I was with colleagues. I mean, the collection is from medieval art until contemporary art. And it's just like the placement of paintings has to do with how visitors move throughout the space. And then how do you place a piece from the collection of the Belvedere? How do you place an iconic piece in the architecture? That has nothing to do with content. It has something to do with social expectations, with marketing, merchandise, and so on. And this is what I understood for the first time, because, I mean, coming from Lüneburg, art and sociology, rather leftist, whatever we do in a way, with Weber to, you know, all this, the new spirit of capitalism, to the Belvedere, which is really the opposite side of the coin, and learning all of this. And it's also learning collection management, dealing with society in a different way. That was extremely interesting at that time.
Was then your work at the Belvedere 21, which is not only spatially separated, but also in a certain thematically, maybe one could say, as with regard to the contemporariness of the collection, it's a sort of different space. Was that then partly mirroring the traditional Belvedere, the castle, or was that also a possibility of actually contrasting, of playing a bit with his expectations?
I mean, there is a problem until today. People consider the space of Belvedere 21 being outside Vienna. I mean, from the city center, it takes 10 minutes to get there, but by tram. But it was so, you know, people went to the Belvedere and the lower Belvedere and the upper Belvedere. Yeah. And it was not so, the visitors numbers for the Belvedere 21 weren't so high. They are not so high until today. Yeah. And but what we did, and this was really interesting, we all had meetings together, and I know the Baroque curators, the medieval curators, and we invited artists like Lisa Oppenheim, for example. I think Agnieszka Polska did something. We invited artists to also intervene in the medieval collection, in the Baroque collection. So we mixed between the different places. And that was actually quite interesting at that time to also understand what art history means in this whole context. And for art history, for me, I'm a trained art historian, and it's still important. It's important in a way to understand where art is coming from. And this was at the Belvedere. This was really good, and I enjoyed that a lot. Working like that.
Yet. You moved, and we will reach Luxembourg in a bit, but from Vienna you went back to Germany, to Hamburg, is that?
Yes, I was asked if I would be interested in applying for the directorship of the Kunstverein in Hamburg. And I had a very good contract in Vienna, and I asked this person who asked me, and I was just like, why? Why should I go back to a Kunstverein with less money, less opportunities, and then I did it, and I got the job, and it was a lot of people ask me why I'm doing this, because having a good museum position, going back to a Kunstverein is, you need to be ambitious maybe again, or curious. I was a bit, the Belvedere was for me. I liked it, but I didn't see so much potential. And being the director is always better than being the curator if you want to have a career. I mean, that's also. And the Kunstverein in Hamburg is one of the biggest Kunstvereine, space-wise, also from the renommee. And I asked them also while having the interviews, and I was just like, you know, I have certain projects I want to do in my life, and these projects I can't do in Vienna. And that's why I did it. And I did all the projects I wanted to do. And what was interesting, usually you come to a Kunstverein, you come from a smaller Kunstverein or other places. I came from a museum. So I brought a completely different structure to the Kunstverein as well and worked with this differently. In Hamburg, I mainly did international productions, and I worked with many, many museums.
Because then that would have been also a question. The Kunstverein Hamburg, in a way, is a particular Kunstverein. Huh? So it's not a Kunstverein in the same way as you talked about the Kunstverein in Lüneburg before.
No.
But it has the name of a rather local art space, but yet it has an international outreach.
It is international. And the thing is, the space is so big. I mean, I would rather compare it to a Kunsthalle. You know, it's a bigger institution. It's even bigger space-wise than the Kunsthalle Düsseldorf, for example. So we had a smaller space and a bigger space, and usually with a Kunstverein, you only do very young artists. In Hamburg, you can't do it. So I worked with museums on a Liz Megger show. We did Wolfgang Tillmans. And in the smaller space, we did upcoming young emerging artists. You know, so we showed both. But in Hamburg, you prepare for a museum career. I mean, Yilmaz is now at the Museum Ludwig. You know, it's because usually you can't move from a Kunstverein to a museum. At least you have to have a Kunsthalle in between. And this was interesting in Hamburg because I could do both. And I only worked with international organizations or with local organizations like the Schauspielhaus, Kampnagel. We did huge productions together, and Hamburg really formed my way of curating in a different way as well. More transdisciplinary, more experimental, more performative in a way, but also,
Is that both reflected in the choice of collaborations? I mean, you talked about the Schauspielhaus, you talked about Kampnagel, which are more, I mean, the one is a theater, the one is what is Kampnagel? It's a space on
Kampnagel is a
performance art, the performative arts,
exactly.
one could say dance, a little bit of theater. So on the one hand, as with regards to collaborations, but that also inform the artists you were then inviting, or the types of art you would be presenting.
I mean, it always a bit out of the box. Because when I invited Wolfgang Tillmans, I knew for Hamburg, I don't want to have a classical Wolfgang Tillmans show. So I asked him, you know what, you don't have to show photography, because I was aware that he was experimenting with video and music, sound, singing. So I invited him to do something different. I always wanted to do something different. Or I worked with Holly Herndon. And Holly Herndon had her one solo show with me. Or with Ho Tzu Nyen, then we worked with Kampnagel. Ho Tzu Nyen did a performance at Kampnagel, and we showed an exhibition with 4 video installations. Or Peaches, we did the only Peaches show. Peaches did a concert at Kampnagel, and we did a performative show where we tried to understand how can we do a performative show without having performers. So it was a moment for experimentation. And I invited artists. I just talked to Jason Dodge and I asked him what kind of curator I am, because sometimes, I'm too close to myself. And he was just like, you are a curator interested in process. You let things go, and you are curious to see where it ends. And this actually I learned in Lüneburg. Because here we invited artists, writers for a project. It started, Kunstraum at that time started with a topic, and in the beginning we weren't interested in a format. We didn't work towards an exhibition, a book, a performance, a lecture, a workshop, a seminar. We just did it, and then let's see what comes out of it. And this was the same in Hamburg. I invited artists. I never invited works. I invited artists, and I'm doing it until today, I'm intellectually interested in. I want to have a discourse. And I want to understand what is contemporary in our contemporary times. And it develops out of this discourse.
Yeah. So it's a kind of constant ongoing conversation with a variety of different dialogue partners who each contribute to your understanding of not only contemporary art, but also how we might understand or make sense or complexify contemporary societies. I mean, one of the times, or one big marker, not only for your time in Hamburg, was obviously there was the Corona pandemic, and also on how to go about it. I mean, then you've got a space which is, dependent on the public or on a relationship to the public of visitors. And would that speak a little bit to your way of experimenting? And
it was terrible.
Yeah.
Again, everything was terrible about the pandemic for cultural institutions, because first we had to take care of all the people working there and see how can we pay and where do we get money to pay them, especially the freelancers. What we decided very early on after the first lockdown is that we move on with the program. If the spaces can be open, we have the program there, otherwise everything is online. And we didn't have much means, and I'm very happy that Milan Ter, now the new director of the Kunstverein in Hamburg, or not so new director anymore, deleted all these horrible videos from the internet, because with very low means, we filmed everything. We filmed openings, we gave speeches, and we decided everything stays the same, we are doing it. We didn't postpone one event or exhibition. We just did it, we installed it. For a certain time, we changed the program a bit. So we invited also all the performance artists in Hamburg that weren't able to work, so that they could do something or film themselves in the spaces of the Kunstverein. We gave them money because we had the exhibition budget, it was there. We changed a bit, we tried to, whenever, in between it was open for 2 weeks, then it was open. And what we also tried to build up new formats to work differently, like teletravail, home office, and there was one very interesting thing. A lot of people in Hamburg told me, even people who've never been to the Kunstverein, they started listening to this while cooking. You know, I'm also doing podcasts while cooking. They listened to it, and for some of them, it broke down the barrier, and they came to the Kunstverein for the first time.
Afterwards, then when it was opened again.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And it
was the Kunstverein, in a way, it visited them at home, in their kitchen, while doing the laundry, and then...
And it was really, we had many discussions, because I had a very big international collaboration on care. And we did the project. And we made all of these different formats. We tried to understand that each format, like an opening, a lecture, we even did a symposium online, and we decided we can't do a symposium online like 3 days in a row. So we choose 1 month, every Thursday or Friday, I don't remember anymore, we have 1 day of lectures and discussions. And suddenly we had a very, very international crowd taking part in this and being our audience. So I defined audiences differently. And I did it also with one of my first projects in Hamburg. I did a project on film. And we also decided that each day at 6 p.m. we show a 60 millimeter. And we started from 2 minutes 30 until 3 hours 30. And that was actually the time of the exhibition. And we were never alone. We did it over 56 days. We were never alone. And after each film, we had a Skype conversation with the filmmaker. So at that time, Frederick Wiseman was part of it. And then we filmed, and then we also filmed it. And people were really sitting and talking, speaking to Frederick Wiseman. But I mean, it was really the quality, the quality of the technological tool. It was really terrible, and wouldn't do that today anymore.
But that speaks a little bit to the curiosity, I guess. Huh? Also, just the daring of, we're going to try this. And if it doesn't stand the technological test of time, then it doesn't. But at least we keep on doing things. Huh? And we keep on having these conversations you've been talking about. Now, as with regard to, because this is not the first conversation we're having, obviously. We met online also, in much better, not just Skype, it was Zoom, I think, back then. Then we had a wonderful coffee at the Kunsthal Charlottenburg in Copenhagen on a summer day, on a so-called Danish summer day.
It was warm.
And then it was warm.
I remember.
It was proper warm.
Really nice.
And then obviously I visited you and your team in Luxembourg, in Mudam, for a couple of days to do interviews, to look at what you do and how you do things. And one of the things which I just came to think about, which links maybe some of the work you've been doing in Hamburg, I mean, there are many links maybe, and also some of the work you're trying to do in Luxembourg right now, maybe the notion of audience development, or what you've been describing as audience development, and also thinking about the boundaries of museum. So I guess in a way what you've been describing in Hamburg, going out into the houses, into the flats of people with a digital program, is something you are, if I understand correctly, are also trying not only digitally, but also in quite analog ways right now in Luxembourg. Could you speak a little bit to that you try to go out with a museum and visit the neighborhood, visit particular groups which you would like to invite to the museum?
I arrived in Luxembourg, this little Grand Duchy that is very international, and this beautiful museum. It's like an iconic architecture from E.M. Pei. So he only did 3 architectures in Europe, museum architectures, and this is the only one that is a full museum, because the other ones are the Louvre Pyramid and the annex to the German History Museum in Berlin. So it's an artwork in itself. It's in a park overlooking the old town of Luxembourg, and everything, and it also in the business district, and the European Court of Justice is there. So it's in a quite deserted area. And I saw and it was mainly occupied also by the bourgeois people, by a certain set of people, and I had the feeling, if we need an open museum, we need more of the communities, because the biggest community after the Luxembourgish people are the Portuguese and the Italians. At the moment, Brazilians and Indians move there. And we had an opening with an Indian artist last year, Dayanita Singh, and then the Indian community came. And they told me, why are you showing an Indian artist? And she's like, because she's good. You know, and so I started first thinking about the area and also the quality, the social quality of a museum. And I thought about it without thinking about people visiting exhibitions, because I decided I want to also have people come to the cafe checking emails, or they sit there and read. And maybe 6 months later, they also see the exhibition, but they know this is a cool place, people are nice, and I can do whatever I want to do. So we don't take entrance fees for the cafe. Then the next thing was, this area is so beautiful, why don't people spend time there? So we need an outdoor cafe. We have to activate the space. And then I thought about a playground, then an arena where young people can sit, where we could also do like projects, but it's also an invitation for other people. And so we are slowly starting doing this. I invited Superflex. I mean, you know, Superkillen in Copenhagen. And we are starting the research project right now to activate the outdoor space. So people can spend time, and because each museum is a mausoleum. And you know, the Mudam is built on a fortress. And you still see it from the outside walls that this is a fortress. So people are really afraid of moving in. And so they're intimidated. They're intimidated from contemporary art. And so now we are slowly starting doing this. And then I recruited a new head of Publics, and Publics was part of the curatorial department, and I decided it becomes its own department. And not only for art education or mediation, but also for public programming. And so I invited somebody who is from Savi Contemporary, this art organization Bonaventure Nikong built up in Berlin, and who knows a lot about communities, to work with the communities in Luxembourg. Because you have to go out there and ask them, because they are not coming. Yeah. You know, they're not interested. And also a community can be the hedge fund manager. You know, Luxembourg is the capital of hedge funds in Europe. So, and the Portuguese and so on. And this is, we started it like 1.5 years ago, and we can see that it's working. Yeah. So more and more people are coming or doing the openings. The openings were mainly VIP openings. Now we have open openings. We have free food for all, free drinks. And people are coming because it's a social meeting place. Yeah. They have to go there because they know they meet all the other people and they have a very interesting time. And then they also look at art. Yeah.
Would you say, I mean, coming a little bit back to the beginning of our talk and the way you described your work here in Luxembourg, where you said it's becoming the world?
In Lüneburg.
I'm mixing
similar
up.
L.
Similar L.
Similar
your work here in Lüneburg, where you said it's about, even if it's a small space, it's about becoming the world. That in a way, this is something which actually is, well, it's something you also try to do right now in Luxembourg, that all the worlds which are within the city of Luxembourg, then for example, and beyond, that they become part of a community, at least of conversations which are going on.
Yeah, because I think we really have a chance in Luxembourg, because it's this very, very small country. It is like 64% are foreigners, and they actively invite people to come. To Luxembourg. We speak 4 languages every single day, and we have 170 nationalities. I mean, when thinking about Europe, thinking about polarization, thinking about migration, Luxembourg for me is a model country. I mean, it's also rich, it makes it easier, for sure. But it is a model country thinking about civil society. We have the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg. That means law and everything that comes with it is very, very important. They're our neighbors.
Yeah, just opposite practically, yeah.
Exactly. And, you know, it's bringing all of these together is like really thinking the world. Yeah. Yeah. Thinking everything that has to do, and that in this small country, everybody can live together in a way that is quite remarkable. And I met mayor of Luxembourg City, a very impressive woman. And she told me very proudly that in Luxembourg people live together. And this is what we need, because I think actually in Europe at the moment it's quite difficult. So we are more and more fighting each other. And for me, it's just like if we can have on a very small level, like something that, like an experiment, how we can live together, how we can do programming around living together and bringing all these different aspects together. Yeah. And, you know, for me, it's like in March, I'm opening a show with Lawrence Abu Hamdan on Israeli surveillance of the Lebanon. That wouldn't be possible in Germany at the moment. Yeah. And on the other side, we are opening a show that there's also Israeli artists in there. So we can cover the whole spectrum of what is discussed at the moment. And I hope the freedom will stay, you know, to... Yeah.
Would you say, I mean, this is, again, I think this links very nicely to what you've been talking about in your time in Hamburg, these kind of conversations with contemporary artists about contemporary issues of the world we're living in and the societies, not only we're living in, but also the problems these societies are facing, and maybe potentially showing ways out, or at least opening a space of freedom where these discussions can happen. Now, the Muram is part of a current project which is actually situated here at Leuphana, which also seeks to address precisely some of these issues together with other international art museums. Amongst them the Belvedere in Vienna, the Metropolitan Museum, the one we've been, it's all coming back together. The Lehmbach House Munich, Louisiana in Denmark, and obviously Zentrum Paul Klee in Bern and the Kunstmuseum Basel so far. From your position, both as a current director of an international art museum, but also kind of intellectual or professional biography, what is it that you would like to get out of conversations which are happening as part of this project, which is based here at Leuphana?
I think it's a chance of intellectual exchange. I find this extremely important. I mean, I stopped teaching 2 years ago now. And I was also missing it because I think research, science, and museums could work together. We are living in times of tremendous change, I think, on all levels. The demands also towards museums, art exhibitions. We have new audiences. We have very different audiences. For me, it's maybe also a platform to reflect what is going on at the moment and to have a professional exchange on different levels on how to move on. Is that correct, or is it too big? I'm asking you.
Well, no, I think it's a wonderful description actually of what we seek to do indeed, of how to move on, also seeing which practices are possible where. How do you go about limitations or challenges if you encounter them, and also to be able to learn from one another?
Exactly.
And I think that would be, and again, a little bit in the spirit of what may be necessary nowadays. This is, I think, one of the things to do is to listen and to learn and to look at what we do and how we do it.
Exactly.
And we really hope to provide such, not just such a space, but also such an atmosphere, very much in light of what you've been talking about, community building indeed. With that being said, Bettina, thank you so much for taking the time. It's been, again, a wonderful pleasure talking to you. And
likewise.
Thank you so much. We hope this was a also interesting conversation for all of you. And we look very much forward for a next talk as part of the community Arts and Culture. Thank you again so much, Bettina.
Thanks.